Thank you. What a lovely and lively way to start the service today. Good. I hope I can live up to that. Okay. Come into the circle of love and justice. Come into this community of mercy, holiness, and health. Come, and you shall know peace and joy. Hi to all our folks on Zoom out there, in addition to the folks that are with us today. Come into this place and let its silence heal your spirit. Come into this place of memory. Come and let its history warm your soul. Come into this place of prophecy and power, and let its vision change your heart. Well, we're entering a time, as we know, in which people all over the world celebrate the solstice in various ways. I'm not going to do the whole thing here of how Christmas is tied to the solstice, why they chose December 25th to be Christmas. But we've got Hanukkah coming up, which is late this year. It doesn't start till December 24th, and then Kwanzaa. And I think Diwali is later this year. Everything's later this year. I don't know why, but it is Advent in the Christian tradition. And so in our hymnal, I chose one of the hymns from our Advent section, not a very big one. Nonetheless, it is 224, Let Christmas Come. Well, I do have a poem for you today, Toward the Winter Solstice by Timothy Steele, just to kind of, again, keep up with the season here. It's one of my favorites. I've read it, I think, every year. Although the roof is just a story high, it dizzies me to look down. I lariat twirl the cord of Christmas lights and cast them on the weeping birch's crown. A dowel into which I've screwed a hook enables me to reach, lift, drape, and then twine the cord among the boughs, so the bulbs will accent the tree's elegant design. Friends passing home from work or shopping pause and call up commendations or critiques. I make adjustments. Though a potpourri of Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Jews, and Sikhs, we are all conscious of the time of year. We all enjoy its colorful displays and keep some festival that mitigates the dwindling warmth and compass of the days. Some say that LA doesn't suit the Yule, but UPS vans, now like magi, make their present laden rounds, while fallen leaves are gaily resurrected in their wake. The desert lifts a full moon from the east and issues a dry Santa Ana wind breeze. And valets at chic restaurants will soon be tending flocks of cars and SUVs. And as the neighborhoods sink into dusk, the fan palms scattered all across town stand more calmly prominent. And this place seems a vast oasis in the Holy Land. This house might be a caravansary, the tree a kind of cordial fountainhead of welcome, looped and decked with necklaces and cinctures of green, yellow, blue, and red. Some wonder if the Star of Bethlehem occurred when Jupiter and Saturn crossed. It's comforting to look up from this roof and feel that while all changes, nothing's lost. To recollect that in antiquity, the winter solstice fell in Capricorn, and that in the Orion Nebula, from swirling gas, new stars are being born. Toward the Winter Solstice by Timothy Steele. I lived in Arizona for a while, so I had the experience of Christmas where they put Christmas lights on cacti. And it's not the same. It's just not the same. But I liked his take on LA. Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about a fun subject today. Keep things kind of light for our season of holiday here. That we always have such mixed feelings, don't we, about these holidays? We're excited and then stressed at the same time, between the present giving and the hosting of the families or the traveling, and it's a lot. But this may help give us a better perspective on that. Spiritual growth does not come simply from reading inspiring books, but by rereading them. Because our chosen faith has no designated sacred text that we are compelled to study. It's a good thing. We sometimes fall into the trap of moving from one thing to another. This week, it's something from the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh, and next week, it's the latest thing from Oprah or our favorite poet. That's not an inherently bad thing either. As we often say, things aren't true because of who might say them, but rather because if they are true regardless of who says it. We find truth, inspiration, and meaning in many voices. And that's good. As for me, I find new and deeper meaning in A Christmas Carol every time I read it, and I try to read it once a year. So if you've read that many ages ago, I challenge you to reread it. It's an easy read, which you can do in less time than it takes to watch a movie or half of a football game. Now, I gave my first sermon on this topic of A Christmas Carol in 2009 when I was a settled minister in Montgomery, Alabama. And I continue to read the story. And then I also had continued to read about the story and about Dickens. He's one of my favorite folks. And I've learned enough, I could probably do a fresh annual A Christmas Story sermon if I were inclined to do that. That's for the future. We'll see. For today, though, I just want to pick one thing to focus on, and that's how Scrooge represents the Unitarian half of our faith tradition and how perhaps we should be more like him. Whatever may be said of Scrooge's faith starts first with Dickens's faith. He was born into an Anglican family, which of course was and remains the official state religion of Great Britain. And some biographies still list his faith as Anglican. Don't believe it. Like many of us, though, he is what we today would call a come-outer, right? How many know that phrase? I mean, you've come from another tradition. Last stat I saw was that 85% of us are come-outers. Only 15% are, cradle UUs, born into the faith. But that's an old statistic. He left the church of his upbringing and found his way to Unitarianism, where he remained pretty much for the rest of his adult life. In 1842, the year before he wrote A Christmas Carol, Dickens toured the United States, and he largely was unimpressed. He wrote a book about that and nobody bought it. It's one of the reasons he wrote A Christmas Carol. When he went to Boston, though, he met and spent a good deal of time with the Reverend William Ellery Channing, the most famous Unitarian minister of his day and arguably still today, required reading of all Unitarian Universalist Seminary students. He also met with Emerson, but he was less impressed with Emerson. Channing made a connection with him, though. And he kept up corresponding with Channing after he went home. He started attending Essex Chapel, a Unitarian congregation that had been founded in 1774. He later worshiped at the Little Portland Street Unitarian Chapel, where he bought a pew, which is what they did in those days. Instead of a regular pledge, and then you'd have your name on the pew, and that would be your pew, right? And he bought a pew at the Unitarian Chapel. That happens to be the same chapel where Charles Darwin worshiped, and they worshiped together. They were born in the same year. They were very much contemporaries. And Darwin, also a Unitarian, right? They became good friends. Now, Darwin would not publish his theories on evolution until 1859, but amidst all the controversy that generated, and we all know about that, Dickens was one of his most vocal supporters, which brings me to the first point about faith. We believe in a faith that is tested by reason. And when I say we believe in this sermon, and I'm going to say it a lot, I'm speaking sort of the historical, traditional Unitarian tradition. I'm not presuming to speak for any one of you. You're more than welcome to disagree. You may say, well, I don't believe that, and that's perfectly fine. That's why we have feedback at the end of the service. So just know that that's kind of what I'm talking about, sort of the historical, traditional Unitarian tradition of that time. Through the work of those like Darwin and Isaac Newton, also a Unitarian, we have found a way to both embrace mystery and respect science. And A Christmas Carol perfectly exemplifies that. Spoiler alert, hopefully you know the story, right? I mean, it's not a big spoiler. You may not have read it for a long time, but there are no actual ghosts, right? And there are no angels. There's no divine messengers in this story. It's all a dream. He dreams he's visited by a ghost, but there aren't any actual ghosts in the story, right? God does not harden or soften his heart, Scrooge's heart, as he did with the Pharaoh and Moses in that story, right? God's not acting in this story. Ultimately, Scrooge comes to his conclusions on his own. He's interpreting his own experience. So when Marley comes to him in his first dream, it doesn't occur to him that Marley, or whatever he was, might be some divine messenger. He rules out the the supernatural. He says to the ghost, he says, you may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than grave about you, whatever you are. You know, he is a great writer. You know, and he's a really good writer, you know, in addition to having a good story and characters. I mean, he's a good writer. Okay. When the first of the three spirits arrives as the clock struck midnight, Scrooge is really confused. And he says, it isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon. Right? He just rules that out. He says, unlike the story, of course, of Joshua at Jericho, we all know that Bible story, God stopped the sun to give them more time to get revenge and fight their battles. Scrooge dismisses out of hand the possibility that God has stopped the sun. He says, I know that's not what happened. So what did happen? Right? And that reminded me of an exchange I had with a good friend of mine in seminary. And I told him how when I was only 7 or 8 and first heard stories about Jesus walking on water, I simply could not believe it. I assumed the writer was just making it up. And as much as I wanted to believe it, and I wanted to believe it, right, I couldn't. I literally could not make myself believe what I could not believe. And this is at age 7 or 8, something like that. And in my mind, that discredited the rest of the story. Kind of ruined the Bible for me for about 30 years. My friend, however, said that when he first heard that Jesus had walked on water, his immediate thought was, that must make him a very special guy. He must have been really incredible. And it added credibility to all the stories attributed to Jesus. And that remains for me the classic example of what it means of having a worldview that's just deeply embedded in you. It's just who you are. And if you're arguing about the subpoints that's contrary to somebody's worldview, you will never win that argument. Right? That's just a little aside. Okay. Now, again, speaking for myself, I think a lot of you would agree. My first response to many religious claims is to dismiss out of hand any supernatural explanations. That's just not my worldview. It just does not occur to me. And instead to seek the truth in a manner guided by reason, while accepting that there are truths that cannot be reduced to empirical data. And I'm just call that mystery. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with mystery. I don't have to have an explanation. I know, for example, that the love I have for my wife, which extended to not having her come and sit through the board meeting, that's why she's not here. She sends her regards. She's doing much better. But I know that the love I have for my wife expresses some evolutionary impulse, that my attraction to her may be reduced to genes and hormones and so forth. But then I ask, why would I want to do that? Why would I want that explanation? Call me a romantic at heart, and I won't deny it. Sometimes I prefer, as one songwriter put it, to let the mystery be. Dickens was like that, and so was Scrooge. When the night was over and the sun arose, he did not dwell on how he might explain what had happened to him. He had been moved to make a change by things he knew could easily be explained by what today we would just call psychology. He knew that, but he didn't stop to analyze it. He just set about making the change and transforming his life from that experience, interpreting his own experience. Which brings me to the next point. Although many of us may have experienced life-transforming moments, like a singular moment, like a surviving a car accident kind of thing, Unitarian Universalists generally believe that faith development comes from growth rather than conversion. That is, our faith matures as we mature, rather than road to Damascus type moments or something that's a gift from the divine that's just instilled in us, like, boom, now you have it, right? We don't believe in those, generally believe in those kind of divine interventions. As noted already, Dickens was changed by his encounter with Channing, his exposure to Channing's understanding of Unitarian Christianity. It had a profound effect on Dickens, but none of that changed his past. Rather, it gave him a different perspective on his past. I tell that to my history students the very first day of class, and I repeat it multiple times. One of my pet peeves is you can't change history. And I said, no, you can't change what happened. History is the story of what happened, and it changes every day. Yes, you can change history, and it does change all the time. And Dickens changed his history as he learned the Unitarian tradition. At the age of 12, Charles Dickens's father was sent off to debtor's prison for 3 months. Although his father had a decent job as a naval pay clerk, the demands of a large family and his own inability to manage money well had put him in that position. Consequently, young Charles began working in a shoe polish factory to help out the family. He was ashamed of his family's poverty, which drove him both to accumulate his own wealth at sometimes great cost to himself, and to sympathize with the poor and working classes. About his childhood, he later would write, "I know all of these things have worked together to make me what I am, but I never afterwards forgot. I never shall forget. I never can forget." And you just see that through all his stories. We are the sum of all the things that have happened to us in all our lives, both from external events and our personal choices for which we are accountable, both good and bad. And we can't love who we are unless we accept that all of those things that are both good and bad brought us to this point where we become this person who, I said in our last message, is loved and who's worthy of loved and who is holy. Couldn't be that person without those negative experiences shaping who you are. Now let's see how Scrooge does this. Even though the story takes place in one night, that's just Dickens's writer's license, how he chose to tell the story. But Scrooge sees his whole life. It is a life review. And Scrooge's transformation occurs throughout the story. It's not a momentary thing that happens at the end. The most moving example of this comes during the visit of the ghost of Christmas past, which takes him back to the time his fiancée, whom he deeply loved, rejects him. They had become engaged when they were both poor. And as he becomes more successful, though, she sees a change in him. She tells him, I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one, have I not? Note the phrase one by one. This was not a sudden change. It was a process. You might call it an evolution, but the better word be a devolution. And she says, may you be happy in the life you have chosen. We choose our lives. We can look at any situation with cynicism or hope. Like Dickens, Scrooge had been poor and had chosen never, ever to forget that. Yet poverty drove Dickens to choose a life committed to love and family and making life better for others. But poverty drove Scrooge to make a life that he believed would make him invulnerable to the pain that inevitably comes with loving others. That was Scrooge's choice. We see that early in the story. Finally, for today, let's look at how Scrooge was redeemed from the life he had made for himself. First, note that he did redeem himself. There's no divine actor here. He is shown who he was, and he sees that he was not a good man. And he sees what he might yet be if he doesn't change his ways. Addicts talk a lot about what it means to hit bottom, and arguably he saw his bottom in his dreams. He was able to perceive that. He made that connection. And he committed his life to doing better, starting with amends to his clerk, Bob Cratchit, which he did not just by sending him a Christmas turkey. Everybody remembers that one because that's the one that's always in the movies and so forth. But he also gave him a higher wage, a living wage, so that he could feed his family and take care of Tiny Tim's medical expenses. They don't add that one to the movies all the time, but that's in the text. This illustrates one of the foundational principles of traditional Unitarianism, which is salvation by character. Salvation by character. It stands in contrast to salvation by works or by faith. It's a different way of thinking of it. All right. Dickens, as did most Unitarians at that time, were theists. They believed in God, a God that had created the universe. They believed that there was a heaven that they would go to, right? But they would get there through their character, not by taking sacraments, and not by just simply affirming statements. It's their character, how they lived their lives. James Freeman Clarke wrote in 1871, we speak of going to heaven as if we could be made happy solely by being put in a happy place. But the true heaven is a state of the soul. It is inward goodness. It's James Freeman Clarke's understanding of how we are saved. Inner goodness, in state of the soul. William Ellery Channing, whom we said was so prominent in an influence on Dickens, thought God was not a person. He said, that's just what we teach children who don't have the capacity to imagine more abstract thinking. But as we grow older, we're able to understand that God is not a person with arms and legs and so forth. God's an abstraction, but more particularly, God is the perfection of virtue. He says, imagine, he asked, what perfect love would look like. What would be perfect forgiveness and mercy and justice? That is God. Perfection. And then he writes, we believe that man is capable of indefinite improvement and that the divine image within him is indestructible. That's our inherent worth and dignity. Inherent, right? Indestructible. And that he is bound by his very nature to ascend to a communion with his maker. We might say that today in more modern language or contemporary language, that we are saved when we become our best selves, the best selves that we can be. That's what he was saying. And he said that in 1828. We can be the best self that we were created to be, but we must believe as a first order principle that we were created to love and to be loved, to forgive, to show mercy, and do justice. You have to have that predicate. Why am I here? Why was I created? To love, to be loved, show mercy, do justice. Okay. This is what Scrooge does. He improves himself. He does not engage in a few things that may be reduced to checking boxes, nor does he make a vow of faith that he renews only in church or on religious holidays. As Dickens writes on the last page of the story, Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became a good friend, as good a master and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Just love that writing. Let that be our aspiration. Not to be miserly, as Scrooge was, but to become, as he became, a good person, a good parent, a good partner, a family member, as good a person as any place we might live might know. May it always be so, and blessed be. Now, we'll take just a very few minutes for some feedback. Okay. Well, this is fun. I think we're having a good conversation with this for a little bit afterwards, and hope that you all will later when you head home and can talk about how you're like and not like Scrooge. Okay. Our final hymn, number 346, is an oldie but goodie. I thought since we were starting with a kind of a newer hymn this morning, I'd do a much more familiar one to close. It's Come Sing a Song with Me. Betty and Pat are going to play for us. Thanks everyone for a wonderful service. Thank you for your beautiful music, and especially that prelude. I just love that. That's wonderful. Oh yeah. Be ours a religion like sunshine that goes everywhere. Its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love, and its profession of faith divine living. Let us go in peace.